The IDF is preparing to take control of several areas in the Gaza Strip as a new, much larger ground incursion is being prepared, even as a member of Hamas's political bureau was eliminated in an airstrike in Khan Yunis over the weekend. This follows the revelation that Israel's airstrikes last week dealt a significant blow to Hamas, eliminating several senior field commanders and members of the political leadership. Hamas is now clinging to power through the use of terror against its own Palestinian population, carrying out executions of anyone who won't cooperate with them and extorting protection money from merchants. There are growing signs that even these tactics won't work for much longer, and this raises the question about whether Hamas will board a flight to Somaliland. We'll take a look into Hamas's terror organization to try and get some answers to this question. Another question that was being asked is whether it was helpful to return to fighting in the Gaza Strip, and one answer comes from the increasing willingness of Hamas to examine a proposal for a ceasefire put forward by the American Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. The plan to extend the ceasefire through the end of Ramadan and Passover has been echoed by a similar proposal made by the Egyptians. However, even as a renewed ceasefire in the south comes into view, the ceasefire in the north is under increasing pressure. Hezbollah launched several rockets into the Galilee over the weekend, prompting an Israeli response, with Defense Minister Israel Katz declaring Metula is the same as Beirut. However, Hezbollah is insisting that the rockets were not fired by them and that they are committed to the ceasefire. And meanwhile, the IDF continues its campaign to demolish the strategic weapons left behind by the Assad regime in Syria so that they do not fall into the hands of the new jihadist regime led by Abu Muhammad al-Julani. And finally, millions of Israelis were in their bomb shelters over the weekend as the Houthis from Yemen launched several ballistic missile attacks. Sirens were heard in numerous communities in the central region and far south into the Negev. However, there were no reports of impacts or casualties, and the IDF said that the attacks were all intercepted and destroyed before they entered the Israeli airspace. On Saturday evening, yet another ballistic missile was fired at Israel by the Houthis in Yemen, but it broke up and disintegrated in the skies over Saudi Arabia. And as always, TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will give us a closer look at events in our neighborhood, including the burning question, is an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities getting closer? United States President Trump recently set a deadline for a few weeks for Iran to reach a comprehensive nuclear agreement, or else. But the regime in Tehran is not intimidated. On the contrary, they're also issuing threats that if you mess with us, you will get slapped. The Revolutionary Guards forces are in an increased state of deployment and are fostering alliances with Russia and China, apparently seeking to deter the Americans from entering a direct confrontation. Mati will take us into the latest developments in our neighborhood, the Middle East. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 534 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, all the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are acting under the direction of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to say to our viewers, thank you so much for all your support. We will continue to update you on the truth from Israel, but we need your help. When you click on the subscribe button, you're helping us circulate these videos further. And that helps us grow the channel and reach more people with the truth. For you, it's a great way to stay tuned with Israel in real time, so don't miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Here at TBN Israel, we're rebuilding the Holy Land after almost 2 years of war. So please, join the Rebuild Israel campaign today. On Saturday, the IDF attacked targets in the Gaza Strip. According to reports from Palestinian sources, one of the targets was the Imad Akel Mosque, which in the past was linked to terror activity and was also attacked by the IDF during Operation Iron Swords and in previous operations. a limited ground incursion has already succeeded in retaking the Netzarim corridor as well as positions on Salah al-Adin Road. In related news, Salah el-Bardawil, a member of the Hamas political bureau, was eliminated overnight between Saturday and Sunday in an IDF strike in the Mawasi area near Khan Yunis. Hamas confirmed his death in an official statement. And out of the 17 members of the Hamas political bureau, he is the 9th to have been eliminated in IDF strikes since the beginning of the war. 6 others, including Khalil El-Haya and Ghazi Hamid, left the Gaza Strip before the war started. And last week, Issam Adalisis, the shadow prime minister of Hamas, was eliminated. This was perhaps the most severe blow suffered by Hamas so far in the new IDF campaign, but it wasn't the only one. However, Hamas is also firing back, including 3 rockets fired at Tel Aviv in Israel from the Gaza Strip on Thursday. Then, on Friday, 2 more rockets were fired towards the Israeli city of Ashkelon. Most of these rockets were intercepted, with the others falling in open areas. Intelligence sources told the Wall Street Journal that even now, after the ceasefire, Hamas remains in munitions economics regarding long-range rockets, and in addition, the organization has been recruiting thousands of new terrorists and, according to Arab intelligence sources, distributing leaflets explaining how to use weapons and wage guerrilla warfare against Israel. One of them details how to attack Merkava tanks, the Israeli tanks, and where are the weak points located. To new commanders, Hamas explained where to position terrorists in case of an IDF ground operation. Let us recall that last Wednesday night, Israel delivered a surprising blow to Hamas in the Gaza Strip, putting an end to the ceasefire. This happened after 2.5 weeks of negotiations without progress, and the political echelon insists that only military pressure will lead to the release of more hostages. At the same time, there is another war objective that Israel has set for itself, and for now it seems far from realization: the destruction of Hamas's military and governing arms in Gaza. Over the past day, sources in the organization and sources close to it have been cited in several media outlets worldwide. International coverage had focused on Hamas's rebuilding and the question of whether Israel can end its role in the Gaza Strip. According to Hamas sources quoted by Reuters, throughout the war the organization tried to develop new strategies. For instance, when Yahya Sinwar was eliminated by the IDF, Hamas shifted to leadership by a steering council to avoid dependence on one figure. And meanwhile, as its rocket arsenal shrank, it focused more on guerrilla warfare. When Israel demonstrated its ability to penetrate electronically for intelligence, both the military and the civilian elements of the organization Hamas began using notes on paper and human couriers. Amidst all of this, Hamas continues to terrorize Gazan residents. In footage posted to Palestinian social media networks on Saturday, armed and masked men identified with Hamas are seen raiding a grocery store. The masked men threatened the sellers and customers, beat them up, and struck the door with their weapons. They were also seen destroying the cash register. And earlier on Saturday, in the Sajaiya neighborhood, IDF leaflets were dispersed calling on residents to evacuate immediately and distance themselves as much as possible, since it is a dangerous combat zone. In the Bet Lahia area, many Gazans left the El Shima neighborhood to shelter in the town's schools. But according to Palestinian sources, evacuees who arrived in the Dir el-Balach in the center of the Gaza Strip complained that Hamas terrorists drove them out of a school where they wanted to find shelter. And beyond that, on Friday, the Hamas interior security apparatus announced the execution by firing squad of a Palestinian suspected of collaboration with Israeli intelligence and of providing information about locations that allegedly led to the elimination of terrorists. And meanwhile, Palestinian media outlets reported throughout Saturday about a wave of strikes across the Gaza Strip, and there were reports of close to 20 fatalities. Recently, sources in Hamas have repeatedly stated that the organization is willing to give up civilian rule in the Gaza Strip, but not their weapons. They also told media portals that the leadership of Hamas has no choice but to restore the reality in the Gaza Strip to the days before October 7 so it can breathe again. And after that, it will hand over the rule to the Palestinian Authority or to an agreed-upon government in a national Palestinian arrangement. According to the sources, Hamas has other cards to play besides the hostages, but they did not specify what those are. And a moment before we continue with a closer look at the diplomatic updates following the fighting in the Gaza Strip and what is happening behind the scenes amongst the mediating states and Israel, I want to ask you to keep spreading the truth and, most importantly, unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. If you want to help us, click that subscribe button. A Hamas spokesperson said on Saturday that the contacts in Cairo for a ceasefire and another hostage deal are continuing despite the return of fighting in the Gaza Strip on Thursday. In a statement to the Qatari newspaper El Arabi El Jadid, the spokesperson denied the claims for United States envoy Steve Witkoff that Hamas insists on continuing the rule in the Gaza Strip. This source said especially that the movement is ready for any change of governments provided that it is acceptable by the agreement. We are not interested in being part of the government, and thus we agreed to form a conference to support Gaza. We have no government's aspirations and we want broad consensus. It should be recalled that over the weekend, Hamas announced that it is examining the American bridge proposal for renewing the ceasefire in Gaza, and at the same time that Israel is stepping up its military offensive in the Gaza Strip. The bridge plan presented last week by United States Special Envoy Witkoff is intended to extend the ceasefire until April after Ramadan and Passover to allow time to negotiate a permanent ceasefire. And Egyptian sources told Reuters for the first time Cairo also offered a plan which includes a proposal to release the hostages alongside a timetable for Israel's complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip with American guarantees. And according to the sources, the United States gave an initial approval to the program, and Hamas and Israel are expected to respond in the coming days. At the same time, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz declared that the IDF is intensifying aerial, ground, and naval strikes and is working to move civilians to the southern part of the Gaza Strip. He added that Israel will continue the operation until Hamas releases more hostages and is completely defeated. That might take some time, as security sources in both Israel and Hamas estimate that the terrorist organization can absorb the losses of its senior leadership and continue the battle for many more weeks and possibly even longer. However, it is far less certain that the civilian population of Gaza can continue in these circumstances for much longer. The United Nations Relief Agency, UNRWA, warned that there is only enough flour left in the Gaza Strip in their warehouses for 6 more days of distribution, and the supply of assistance has completely stopped since the fighting resumes. Despite the organization's rule in caring for Palestinian civilians, let us recall that the IDF previously proved the connection between the United Nations agency, UNRWA, and the Palestinian Hamas terrorist organization. Also, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Dorothy Shea, told the Security Council last week that Hamas bears full responsibility for the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip and for the resumption of fighting. And Donald Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, spoke on Friday with American journalist Tucker Carlson on his podcast and addressed the situation in Israel from his perspective. During the interview, he said Hamas cannot remain in a governing body and as a terrorist organization. Maybe it can be part of the beginning of the transitional period, but not as a terrorist organization. He also addressed Israel's role, saying that a lot of what we are able to do now is thanks to the fact that Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, cut off the heads of Hezbollah and Hamas. Hamas is not even close to what it was before, and that also reflects on Iran. Iran is now much less inclined to activate its proxies. He added, people say that Netanyahu is more interested in fighting than releasing hostages. I can understand that, but I don't agree with it. He even noted that he agrees in certain respects with the Prime Minister's view that the way to get the hostages back is through pressure on Hamas terrorist organization. A week and a half ago, we presented Hamas with a proposal, and they rejected it the next day. We thought it was outrageous that they rejected it, 3 days later, the Israelis struck in Gaza, and guess what? Hamas is talking again. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on the truth of what's happening here in Israel, and as always, we ask you to help us by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and don't forget to click that subscribe button to help us reach more people. In the ongoing conflict, many Israelis are once again called to reserve duty in the IDF, balancing their duties to the nation with personal responsibilities. This is a testament to their resilience. During my own reserve service, daily prayer provided spiritual grounding and hope. And additionally, I found that maintaining physical energy and mental clarity was crucial. One supplement that significantly aided me was Vinia, an Israeli product made from red grape cells. Vinia naturally enhances blood flow to the heart, brain, and muscles, helping to sustain energy and focus. Available not only in capsules but also as coffee or tea, Vinia offers a refreshing start to your day. It was invaluable during my service and continues to support me on a daily basis even today. I encourage you to experience Vinia for yourself and tell me what you think. So go visit www.vinia.tbnisrael.com or call 800-638-1944. You don't regret it. Now, back to the news, and we're switching our focus to the northern arena. A dramatic event occurred over the weekend as rocket launches crossed the Lebanese border towards the State of Israel for the first time since the ceasefire's expiration and subsequent extension. Israel, which had already withdrawn most of its forces from southern Lebanon but remained in certain points, is now facing dissatisfaction from Hezbollah and the Lebanese leadership. Hezbollah denied involvement in the firing, while Lebanon claims it is investigating the incident and emphasizes its commitment to the ceasefire. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun condemned the firing as a harm to the homeland and asserted that he instructed the army to take measures to maintain stability in order to prove that the new leadership is in control of the situation. With all of that having been made clear, from Israel's side, the 3 rockets were successfully intercepted and 3 others fell in the Lebanese territory, and no damage or casualties were caused. But just the same, a few minutes later, the IDF began striking Hezbollah's targets in southern Lebanon, and Arab media portals reported damage and casualties in several areas as a result of the Israeli strikes. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz announced the government of Lebanon is responsible for everything that happens from its territory. Israel will not allow any harm to its citizens and its sovereignty, and will act in every way to ensure the security of Israel's citizens and the communities in the north. Also on Saturday, the IDF attacked 2 military bases located in central Syria, issuing a brief statement that it struck strategic military capabilities remaining in the military bases referred to as Palmyra and T4. The statement added that the IDF will continue to act to eradicate any threat to the citizens of the State of Israel. And the next day, the Syrian Foreign Ministry condemned Israel's attacks on its territory and called on the international community and the United Nations to intervene to stop them. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development regarding the northern arena. We now turn to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will explain the latest power moves in our neighborhood, the Middle East. But first, I want to invite you to once again look for the subscribe button and click on it if you haven't already, so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, over to you, Mati.
Is it possible that war with Iran, or an attack by the US and Israel on Iran, is finally imminent? Well, this is what it possibly looks like at the moment. We're at a unique moment in time where it seems like everything is coming together to something we've been talking about for a very, very long time: an attack on Iran. Let me give the backdrop to everything we're talking about today. For months now, the US and Israel have been putting a lot of pressure on the Iranians to scale back on the nuclear program, to pull back on their proxy warfare. And this last year and whatever, it's been 4 months now in this Middle East, has been exactly that, pushing back on Iranian influence, Iranian involvement, and Iranian aggression in this region, time and time again, to prevent them from continuing with their Ring of Fire doctrine. And the big thing, the big piece that's been on the table for the Iranians has been and will continue to be their nuclear desires, specifically their desire for nuclear capabilities in a military sense of the word. And now we're at a very interesting place. Since President Trump has been in office, he's been saying something very interesting. He's been applying a maximum pressure campaign in a diplomatic and a financial sense on the Iranians, and at the same time, for the first time in a really long time, saying, look, there's another option here, which is the military option. We're willing to do something that people have not been willing to do before, which is to take full military action against the Iranians directly. Israel's been part of that game. We've been preparing, we've been practicing, we've been training together with the Americans, practicing exactly the type of mission that will bring down the nuclear program within Iran. But now things have heated up even more. The Iranians are saying that they're in a maximum level of readiness. Several governments, the French included, have said, told their citizens to start pulling out from Iran and move out because an imminent attack might be possible. Is it possible that we're going that direction? I'm not entirely sure, but let's examine the moving pieces that brought us to this moment. What's different now in this entire situation is the fact that US President Donald Trump has actually put a deadline on the negotiations with Iran. He's said several times in recent weeks that his goal would be to reach an agreement with the Iranians where they would dismantle their nuclear program, and of course then the US in turn and the other countries that are involved will remove part at least of the sanctions that they've imposed on the Iranians. But this time around, he's saying that there is a deadline. It might be weeks, it might be a couple of months, it's not entirely clear what the date that was communicated to them was, but there is a deadline. It's not forever going back and forth talking about this and just letting them inch towards nuclear capability. It's for once a much harder line saying, we won't let you progress, and if you continue to progress with your nuclear plan, we will attack. Well, is an attack possible? Absolutely. The US Air Force and the Israeli Air Force have been training time and time again to do exactly that, to fly all the way from Israel and from other areas and airports in the Middle East, all the way into Iran, refuel on the way, drop a huge amount of munitions and bunker-busting bombs specifically in Iran, and then return to safety. So this is something that's been practiced, this is something that has been prepared, this is something that is on the table on every possible level. But it gets even more interesting than that. US has been putting an incredible amount of pressure on the Iranians on the financial side of things. No more of the games that existed in the past where they're allowed to go back and forth and negotiate for months, sometimes years, without any clear decisive moment. Right now, the decision and the pressure is you must make quick action towards an agreement. And this is something this region needs, because the US is involved also with the Saudis, and Israel is also involved with the Houthis that have been launching missiles at us on a daily basis. All of those are proxies of the Iranians. Let me remind you, we've been fighting a war between Hamas, with Hezbollah, with the Syrians that had a lot of involvement of the Iranians, with the Houthis that continue on a daily basis, and all of that comes together to a point where there is a desire and a need and a pressure to end the situation with the Iranians with an agreement or take military action. Now let me ask you a question. We've talked about this option of taking military action, and in the past it seemed like it was a vague threat. Israel wasn't prepared, the US wasn't prepared, but now under President Trump, it seems like for the first time in a really long time, there is truly an option of taking a military attack as an option against the Iranians. Not only that, President Trump has made some very, very clear threats against the Iranian government as it relates to Houthi involvement in the Red Sea. Now let me remind you, for months now, actually it's more than a year now, the Houthis throughout this region and throughout this war have been taking attacks or making attacks against vessels traveling through the Red Sea and destabilizing this region, and then by doing all of that, weakening the US stance and Israeli position in this region. At the same time, they've been launching ballistic missiles against Israel and drone attacks against Saudis and others in this region. The US said, and specifically this is President Trump speaking to the Iranians, said, we hold you accountable for everything the Houthis do. Every Houthi bullet is an Iranian bullet. So when you pull all the factors together, the US has really put the pressure on the Iranians. And there might be something that we don't know. If you look at the French government's declaration or statement that they're evacuating their citizens from Iran for fear of imminent attack, that might just be the clue that we needed to understand how close we are to an attack. Is this attack days away or weeks away? We won't know. But my hope is that the pressure works and the Iranians back down, reach an agreement that is good for Israel, good for the Iranian people, and good for stability in this region. Now back to Yael Pinto.
Thank you, Mati Shoshani. You really clarified the situation, and it's super intriguing to know what's the near future gonna hold for us. So, to stay tuned to the truth, share and follow us, and let's continue to the farthest sector from Israel, the Houthis in Yemen. The firing of ballistic missiles at Israel is increasing, including on Sunday morning, just a few hours before we filmed this report for you, across Israel as people are on their way to work and children, the sirens began to beep and were heard as the Air Force intercepted a missile launched from Yemen. An IDF spokesperson said that the missile was intercepted before it crossed into the country and the alerts were activated in accordance with the policy. Magen David Adom stated that there were no reports or hits or casualties. The previous time a missile was launched from Yemen at Israel was on Friday evening. After the Friday launch, the Houthis said that they were trying to shut down Ben Gurion Airport. The militia's military spokesperson, Yahya Sareh, directly addressed international airliners, declaring that Ben Gurion Airport in Israel has become unsafe for air traffic. In addition, he claimed that they attacked the United States aircraft carrier USS Harry Truman in the shadow of the United States strikes in Yemen. But the Pentagon has consistently asserted that the Houthi attempts to attack their ships have been completely ineffective. In fact, over the last 24 hours, American forces struck the Houthis repeatedly, and according to the El Hadat media channel, there were about 5 American strikes aimed at Houthi weapons depots in Mijzar district of Marib Governorate in Yemen. And earlier, there were reports of American strikes on Houthi Navy bases in Hudaydah, in which, according to the reports, Houthi Navy Commander Mansour el-Saadi, Abu Saj, and several others were injured. In related news, sources told Saudi news portals that the commander of the Iranian Quds Force, Ismail Qani, issued a warning to the leadership of the pro-Iran militias against American strikes on the Yemeni terrorist organization headquarters in Baghdad, in Iraq. And according to the sources, he stressed that no military activity should be carried out at this sensitive stage. And following Qani's warning, it was reported that the Houthis evacuated the strategic headquarters that they had in a prestigious neighborhood in central Baghdad. It was also noted that the Yemeni organization might close 2 additional headquarters in response to pressure from the coalition in Iraq. So here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development regarding the Houthis in Yemen, and as always, we ask you to keep spreading the truth and follow us, and most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the swift return of our hostages who are held in the Hamas tunnels in Gaza. Continue to pray for their safe return to their loved ones here in Israel. Pray for all the civilians that are affected by this conflict because of these terrorist organizations, if it's in Israel, if it's in Yemen, if it's in the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Syria, or Judea and Samaria. And most importantly, unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem, this city right behind me, because this is a spiritual war and we're all together.